This is an SM Media production. Hi everyone and welcome to this very special edition of SM Media, our special podcast. I'm Scott McPike by Steven Harrigan from Harrigan's History of Heart and Hand. Stephen, thanks very much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
How you doing? All right?
Yeah, pretty good. We're just chatting and saying that, the festive period, I get 2 weeks off at this time of year, so that means a few overindulgences in eating and drinking. So eat, drink and be merry, as they say.
Brilliant. So it's one of the times you just enjoy every moment you've got with loved ones. Well, I'm bringing you a special podcast today, just kind of obviously Saturday coming up, it's the 50th anniversary of the Ibrox disaster where 66 fans tragically lost their life. I just want to kind of ask you, Stephen, like, how difficult is this time of year? Obviously, like, I'm young and I don't know if, as I said, when we kind of arranged to kind of do this show, I was saying to you straight away, like, I'm going to struggle with this because I don't know the full details of the story. I've tried my best to research it over the years, and I've kind of I think I've tried my best to kind of get a show in place. And how for yourself, like, what's your kind of thoughts on the anniversary?
It's a big milestone this year. I think it's something, I don't want to say celebrate, but it's something we have to remember. We have to always take into focus what happened at 66 people went to a football match and never came back. There's a lot of lessons to be learned along the way, but the top of it is families are without loved ones, and that's never something that's acceptable, even back then in different times. Most of my experiences have came through to speaking to people. Know people that was there. My grandfather, his experiences, the person sitting next to Ibrox, lost 2 friends from nights we did it. So yeah, that's mostly where my experiences come and how I've got my lessons throughout these years. I don't think I'm far off ages with yourself, but certainly it was taught to me and brought up to me at a very early age, importance of this date, the importance of why we should always remember it.
Yeah, definitely. It's always this time of year, but I think this year's a big one, but every year we do think about this game, this kind of sad time round about this time of the year. But we'll get into kind of what happened that day. Obviously, the 2nd of January 1971 was Rangers played Celtic at Ibrox in a traditional New Year Old Firm derby. It was a big game for both teams. What was the significance? Was obviously Celtic were obviously going through their 9 in a row period. They'd obviously just won the European Cup. Like, were Rangers and Celtic kind of close at this point, and they're kind of running for the title?
No, Rangers, we weren't particularly doing so well. Celtic were very much a dominant side and very much in their pomp at this stage. So for us, it was just about the importance of an Old Firm fixture and trying to lay a glove on the other side of the city that was having so much success during this period.
Yeah, obviously Jock Stein, Willie Waddle led both teams, and it was an uneventful New Year game. It was pretty uneventful during the game. It was 0-0 up until the 89th minute. Jimmy Johnson gave Celtic a dramatic 1-0 lead, which I think a lot of Rangers fans thought the game was over, but Rangers got the park and equalised with Colin Stein in the 90th minute, and the game finished 1-1. Like, what was obviously you spoke to a few people that were there that day. What was their kind of thoughts of the game?
The thoughts were it was a pretty, it wasn't a spectacular game by any means. It was a very cold day. There's a mist kind of drawn in, but the game was particularly uneventful, especially for an Old Firm game. And then it comes to life in the final stages. Of course, I think Bobby Murdoch hits a shot that hits off the bar.
Yeah,
it's turned in by Jimmy Johnson, and then basically from the prevailing kickoff, Rangers got up the field, get a free kick, like on a left-hand side, just in the left-hand side of the box, whip it in. It's a very scrappy goal by Colin Stein, but that's the last kick of the ball. So at that stage, it was celebrated like the Rangers in like a win, because to lose a 90th minute goal, this isn't the days, of course, where you're playing 5 and 6 minutes or more injury time and stuff like that. So to go and get an equaliser at the closing stages felt very much like a win for the majority of supporters in attendance here. I think if you're a Celtic fan that was in attendance, you'd be pretty disappointed that you let that slip. But other than that, it was a draw, which is always seen as a good result in Glasgow, because it's less, going to be less trouble, less incidents to deal with, traditionally. So both sets of supporters were probably leaving the ground. Celtic pretty disappointed. Rangers fans were jubilant. I haven't snatched that last half equaliser.
Yeah, definitely. As you said in it earlier on, and I kind of wrote this down as well, there was kind of misty conditions kind of set in during the game, which made it kind of difficult for a lot of fans to kind of see the game and things like that. But what I just want to kind of say is as well, I spoke to a couple of people who were there that day. My dad's friend was one of them. He said basically that day he couldn't even see Colin Steen's goal because of the fog and the mist. Like, so we move on to kind of after the game. Now, what I always thought was, and I don't know, like this is where obviously we kind of start with what happens after this. And my understanding up until a couple of years ago was that when Jimmy Johnson scored, a lot of the Rangers fans that were from Stairway 13 obviously left the ground to get home for early trains and things like that, whatever the case may be. And what I always understood, and I don't think I was ever told this, I just assumed this is what happened, is that whenever Colin Steen equalised, a lot of the fans rushed back to try and get up the stairs, and I always thought there was a crush in the middle. Was this that I kind of read about this in the past few days, and this was confirmed not to be true? Like, did you hear that kind of thing as well? Like when you were?
Yeah, it's a great myth. Certainly in my younger years, this was the one I heard first. Probably around the playground and stuff like that.
Yeah,
people always spoke about. How it was a last-minute goal by Colin Steen, our last second goal. Really, people changed direction, and the people that were coming down the staircase that created this. But I was told very early on by people that are close to me that this wasn't the case, that they didn't believe that. And I think the myth got arms and legs as well when you've seen certain things like Upton Park had a sign for many years that used to say, "Remember Ibrox, leave slowly." So again, that added to the mystique.
Yeah.
Putting the illness back in the fans and telling you to take their time as they vacate the ground in the days. But yeah, certainly I think that's where the myth got kind of arms and legs. But for me, it was nothing more than that. Anybody that was there, anybody that really delves into it knows that wasn't the result. It was actually proven not to be the contributing factor in the inquiry that followed as well.
Yeah, the thing with it as well is it was 80,000 people at the game, and 20,000 fans used Stairway 13 as their exit because, as I believe, it was the closest exit to the subway. Obviously, you and I have been to Ibrox on many occasions, and we've seen that this is the case. Like, how was that? Like, I never ever understood. Like, how did the exits work at the time? Like, where were they? Where were the kind of staircases?
The other staircase, exit 9, was basically, see where the gates are. Now, obviously, the gates have since moved.
Yeah.
So the club deck's about. So basically, the entrance to the club deck now are where the John Gregg statues. That would have been staircase 9, and then round the other side would have been Stairway 13. And that's, I think, I don't want to see some of the stairs remain, but certainly you could see where they follow down to if you walk that past down to the subway. As he's speaking, of course, it used to be to the old Rangers shop and everything else. And you got to remember, these grounds were built. Ibrox was like many grounds around Britain. It was one of the, you go up and then down into the terraces.
Yeah.
Most of them, it had some moderations, cutting the capacity. Obviously, Ibrox used to hold 120,000, and now the capacity at this time was 80,000. But most of the moderations were very minor. They hadn't changed an awful lot since the days of, after the Second World War. The only things that were added to really of any real significance, I think, were kind of, roofing. Some places called them the shed, that kind of thing. But there wasn't a great deal of infrastructure added. The barriers were upgraded to metal, that kind of, and wood replaced. But apart from that, most of the grounds still resembled that. And all of them resembled that kind of oval shape that you see in old pictures of an awful lot of the grounds. It was just up and over the gravel, and then that took you down. So the stairways, if you ever stand down at the bottom, going down to the subway from the kind of, it's the car park now, the bit that you can walk around Ibrox.
Yeah.
You can imagine how steep it must have been to get you right up and then and back over the terracing.
Yeah, that's what I've always thought as well. Like, I've used that stairway quite a few times to get kind of closer to my dad's car and things like that. And I've always, the one thing I've always said is the steps were really steep, and I never ever kind of fathomed just how there was 100 of those steps, how hard it must have been, especially on like a winter's day to climb them.
I mean, the only thing I can think is, see, this day and age, if you've ever been in the stand behind the goal at, say, Fir Park, that's a very steep staircase. As you're going up to the top tier. But obviously it's nothing like it was, because the gaps between the steps as well were a lot different. There wasn't legislation in place that had to be a set distance and set number of steps. So yeah, it's very steep, but that's how all grounds were constructed. My grandfather and my dad as well always say that they were amazed that nothing ever happened at Hampden. They
Yeah.
said Hampton was the worst ground of them all, you know, in terms of going there. You really felt for your safety at that ground. So it wasn't unusual, and that was just how they were constructed. And yeah, it was very much of its time.
Yeah, and the stairway was separated by 7 steel rails that some of them obviously gave way in the crushes. We've seen kind of photos that I've seen since, and there were grass banks at either side of the stairway that were inaccessible due to the concrete partitions that held the staircase up. Were they only just put in like a few years before that, I think?
They'd been added. There'd been an incident in 1961, another tragedy where two boys had lost their lives on that very staircase. So they've made some moderations. And in that case, I think it was wooden slats that had gave way and obviously contributed in some way. So they'd shored them up by basically putting concrete pillars in, so they couldn't go in there. And they put the metal railings and being forced down the sections to split it up. And that was thought to just make you obviously pick a lane, if you imagine, as you're going down that staircase, and spread out the volume of the fans when they're leaving.
Yeah, and after the game, it's believed. I don't know. I obviously want to get your thoughts on this if you kind of believe what happened here. But the belief is a spectator lost their footing, causing a crush, and people were kind of losing air gradually at the top of the staircase. Is that what you kind of heard as well?
Yeah, and I was told that by somebody who unfortunately was there, and I don't know if he was a direct eyewitness, but certainly from a very young age, it was very quick to point me in that direction. And again, going back to that what you spoke about earlier, that myth of people turning back. He said no, it was somebody falling, and when somebody falls, the momentum's going to take them forward, and it just gives that kind of domino snowball effect that unfortunately ends in tragedy.
Yeah, and the thing as well is that did you watch the documentary last night on BBC about it? They showed you it was kind of a reconstruction kind of photo, and it just if that was how it ended up, like the way the kind of people were just crushed at the bottom of how was it only 66? Do you know what I mean? Like it was just it looked crazy, and I just can't fathom how hard it must have been to get out. And eyewitnesses say that we're losing air gradually, but I want to just touch on obviously a few of the victims that were mentioned kind of last night. The 5 kids from Markinch and Fife, like that story just kind of it made me near enough cry. It was just a horrible story. But the three Celtic supporting friends as well, with their five Rangers supporting friends they'd arranged to go to the game separately, and they were going to meet up after the game, and that was just how heartbreaking was that to hear that story.
That's a story. That's the first thing you're told after the facts are relayed to you about disaster. I think that's the first thing I can ever recall hearing about it, and it just breaks your heart.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that they'd went away or they'd went into Glen Rosses with a couple of Celtic supporting pals, and then they kind of split off. But for 5 boys to go and 3 of them buried in the same day in such a small town. They're wounds that just never heal. I mean, how can you ever deal with that? 5 boys, 5 friends. I go to the football, and I'm sure you do, for a number of years with my pals, and you can never ever imagine that you all just wouldn't come home one day. It's just unthinkable. And when it's such a small community, the impact in it is felt a lot greater than if it's a larger one. It doesn't, obviously, for the families, the impact is still very much the same. But when you see the pictures, you see the whole turnout, it just absolutely breaks your heart.
Yeah, really hit home watching it yesterday. Peter Easton, Martin Payton, Mason Phillips, Brian Todd, and Douglas Morrison. All 5 of those young boys lost their lives that day. It was just horrible to hear the stories of their loved ones and their friends and that as well. Like the youngest victim as well, Nigel Pickup, was 9 years of age. Like I just can't fathom that.
I mean, to be honest, when you see the pictures last night, you think about it, it doesn't surprise you, because you think if young boys anywhere in that kind of the crush when it happens, you're not going to have a lot of chance. He's not going to have a lot of height as well to get a lot of leverage, to pull himself out. It's tragic. 9 years old,
it's horrible.
Yeah, so much of his life to still live.
Yeah, and I've heard kind of eyewitnesses reports, and I want to just touch on a story I spoke to a couple of people who were there that day. They weren't anywhere near Stairway 13, but they just told the story of kind of stuff they heard as well about policemen trying to pull people out, and ambulance drivers and things like that trying to just get as many people as they can into ambulances and things. Just the unsung heroes of stuff like that are obviously the emergency services who are the first responders, but how how hard would that must have been for them, just try to get as many people as they could out and get as much people to safety.
Yeah, I mean, you think of the chaos that's ensued soon. The person I spoke to, the person that sits next to my Ibrox who was there, said that you could, as you come down the stairway, you knew something was serious. He said, but you just couldn't help. There was so many people trying to pull people out and stuff like that. And there wasn't, you've got to remember, in 1971 there wasn't any disaster plans in place. There wasn't any training for this, or there wasn't any protocols. This was very much in the hop. I always remember my papa tell me that the first thing he ever got sense that something was, wasn't quite right. He was walking down Shield Hall Road, and he said he just heard that, and seen ambulances shoot by him. He said the lights he'd never seen before. The amount of it. So he was very much aware something was going on, but it wasn't until obviously much later on he realised the full extent of tragedy. You think, that policeman they spoke about last night, the documentary, who is that one that's witnessing it? It must be such a helpless feeling, because you really are trying your best. But I'm going to say adrenaline kicks in. But the aftermath, there wouldn't have been any counselling or any help for him as well, and that goes for the people that were there. You heard the gentleman last night speak about it and say that he had to go back off to his work on Monday, and I'm sure he wasn't alone in that. There'd have been a lot of people that were probably suffering from the likes of post-traumatic stress. There was just no diagnosis; it didn't exist, and they're also victims of this as well. It affects so many people. Just the whole impact of the events that take place.
Yeah, we'll move on as well. Just talk about Margaret Ferguson, who was the only female victim to pass away in the incident. She was only 18. The story of her family I thought was very moving. Just the fact that her dad had obviously told her not to go to the game, and again, with me and you probably been in that situation as well. You defy your parents, and you do what they tell you not to do. Do you know what I mean? I just can't put that into words, just how heartbreaking the story our family told. I think our sister had said as well, just how they've never ever been able to think, like, to get out of their mind, like 50 years on. It still feels like yesterday to them.
Yeah, well, you imagine the last conversations they had with, telling her not to go to the game, and obviously in the days there wouldn't have been a large majority of women that would have went to football matches. So she snuck off, passion for the club, went with her boyfriend, and obviously he the story of him tripping, losing her grip, and she obviously fallen as well. And I thought it was very heartbreaking as well when they told the story about the two men that came to the door.
Yeah.
And one of them says that he went back down to Manchester, I think it was, and that he would never ever go to another football match again. Such was, obviously the trauma that he'd seen. It's heartbreaking, and you've seen the pain still etched in that family. 50 years on, it's very much real with them, and of course it would be.
Yeah, definitely, and as well as that, like they talk a lot about survivor's guilt and things like that. Like it's as you said earlier on, like 50 years ago, there wasn't things in place for like post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma and things like that. It was just I just can't imagine what they were all having to deal with. And obviously the thing that always sticks out with me, like whenever I've watched kind of documentaries and things like that, and I've obviously kind of, like yourself, just seen this second hand and not spoke to people who were there, and like Jock Wallace and Jock Stein, like the Rangers assistant manager and the Celtic manager, lifting victims onto the stretchers, and I just like that picture of Jock Stein will just like I never ever. Whenever I see it, I'm just like, it just sums up what was actually going on that day. Just a man like that, just trying to help as many people as he could.
Yes, it's the magnitude of it, and clearly they know it because the manager sent the players away. Jock Stein sent the Celtic bus away.
Yeah.
He sent the team away, and there's a story from obviously Derek Johnson. He says he's in the bath. A lot of the players like to obviously leave early after the types of games, so they would go in, get changed very quickly and leave, and he was in the bath. He was the last player in there, and he says as he left, for the bath at the end of the changing room, the police were in there lining out bags, and the policeman, kind of looked at him and says, "This ain't for you. You need to go." And that's when it kind of struck him as well. And while that's going on, you've got the managers, you've got the physios, anybody that had any sort of training or didn't, just trying to get down and do what they can just to lend a hand. And they pictures, because you've got the fog and everything in the background, even now that they're so eerie, aren't they? You can't look at them without your heart popping. It's just, again, that's the gravitas of the moment, and how desperate the situation are. Everybody is doing anything that they possibly can to try and save lives.
Yeah, and obviously most of the 66 deaths were caused by what they call compressive asphyxia, which is basically when you lose air, and 200 fans were injured. But when you hear eyewitnesses, it was like the eyewitnesses that were injured, the people that were injured it was more bruising and kind of loss of air and cuts as opposed to like broken bones and fractures and things like that. What did you kind of hear about that as well? Have you kind of heard the same thing, that it was, because I've always heard like the victim, whenever if eyewitnesses saw the bodies and things, they just looked as if they were asleep because they were obviously they just lost air. Like, is that what you'd heard as well?
Yeah, I mean, and there's stories of people's watches popping, due to the pressure situation. Obviously, people's belongings getting lost, shoes very commonly. But that picture you said there, unfortunately, is one that I've heard, a few times. It's sucking out of life. It wasn't a lot noisy. It wasn't, huge screaming. There was people waving white handkerchiefs in there to try and tend for help. And it only takes a couple of minutes. You think, 3-4 minutes, and people are really struggling and struggling for life and freedom for here. So they're trying to absorb any bit of energy they can. You can't move. That picture, that diagram, the graphic put up last night, there's no manoeuvring room, there's no wiggle room.
No.
If you've got bodies on top of bodies, there's just no way for you to go. And it's a bit like drowning, isn't it? You're just suffocated, and the life is unfortunately sucked out of you.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of touch on the 66 victims. Just I want to talk about their ages as well. Just one of them was obviously 9 years old. We touched on Nigel Pickup. 32 of them were aged between 10 and 19. It just kind of shows you as well, like these were young boys, and people had lived their whole lives in front of them. And 16 are obviously between 20 and 29. 12 between 30 and 39, 5 between 40 and 49. There was a gentleman by the name of Matthew Reid was the oldest at 49. Like, it just puts it into perspective, just how many of these people still with their lives in front of them.
Yeah, and you look at a football crowd even today, there's no set demographic. There might be one slightly higher than the other, but the thing that appeals to everybody is the love of the game, and that's very apparent here with the kind of age disparities and the differences in age. These are just a bunch of boys, bunch of men, vast majority and women that are going to the game to enjoy the football New Year's Day, and then on the 2nd of January, and this is what happens. A simple thing causes such a catastrophic event, and it's the whole thing. It's complete tragedy. The ageism, so much lifestyle we live in, and so many of them, and that's the thing that really breaks your heart. People that just don't return home, families that are stressing for the whole night. That again, because of the time it is and what was in place at that time, you've not got a huge system for identifying people, so that process stretches out over a day or two before people are formally identified as well, which you can imagine that the pain for the families as well is completely unbearable, just waiting for somebody to come back through that door without the the use of mobile phones and all the technology that we have available today, that you would be able to contact people the way that they had for the young boys and men that were coming home. And of course 66 of them would never arrive.
Yeah, and just to touch on as well, we touched on kind of Jock Stein and Jock Wallace. There was Sean Fallon as well, like the Celtic assistant manager. He was, I didn't even know this until I read up on this, that he was a trained lifeguard, and he revived a young fan with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Like, how on earth can we just fathom what, like, these people helping, like, just doing what they can? And obviously Sean Fallon will probably, I just don't know how to put that into words, just how brave it was of him, just to get in to do as much as he can just to help the victims that were there and things like that. Like, it must have been so difficult.
Yeah, and that's massive. That's somebody's life, and again, there was no breathing apparatuses available at the days. It would have been certainly the amount that was required. So his training, something that he probably thought he never had to use again, it saved lives at such a time when he should be going in and talking about football. To kick in and to do that shows a mark of a man, and to again bring somebody back. It keeps one family from having that dreaded knock at the door, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And when the ambulances began to arrive, it was another story I read about this I just found very moving as well. There was a couple of Celtic supporters buses that drove some of the injured to the nearest hospital. Like, just, we talk about, like, particularly this week, we're going to we'll touch on the kind of the football side of it and things like that, but it's human lives as well. And this football rivalry goes out the window, and I think that's, like, the fact that Celtic supporters buses would help out and things like that. And football rivalry goes out the window in a situation like this.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And you see that in the aftermath as well, because I think the benefit match is the only time that Rangers Celtic come together as one.
Yeah.
That would have been a mixed crowd at Hampden to play. Was it Rest of the World Select or whatever it is? Run out 3-1 winners with Archie Gemmell scoring. So yeah, everything goes out the window when this kind of thing happens, and everybody just does all they can to help as best they can. But the thing is, for most people, it's a very helpless feeling. It must be such a thing to witness and have to go through on all sides.
Yeah, and obviously, like, after it, the inquiry kind of started to find out what happened, and it was a fatal incident inquiry, lasted 7 days, and it deemed that Rangers were somewhat negligent. And I just want to kind of touch on this as well. Like, also, Rangers had a previous disaster in 1902. It was a completely different cause which had caused the incident. It was a wooden turnstile. I
think the wooden stand, and during the Scotland-England game actually continued, but completely different construction and time. Nothing to do with this one.
Yeah, and the concerns were raised. We touched on it earlier on about the 2 people were killed in 1961 in a crush in Stairway 13, and there was a couple more incidents as well. Like 1967 saw 8 fans injured in another kind of incident in Stairway 13, and then 2 years later in 69 there was 26 injured. What was there ever a kind of reason given as to why, like, the Rangers board? I don't know if did they act on the incidents before to kind of try and enforce the stairway and things like that? Did they try and kind of ensure safety before obviously the inevitable happened?
Again, it's very difficult to measure it in today's terms and speak about it. I think at the time there was slight alterations done, but it just wasn't the norm. It's cruel and it's harsh a reality as that is. There just wasn't a lot done. I mean, even looking at the aftermath of this disaster, there's a green code that comes out, green code of safety, and that's in order to try and strike up a relationship between, like, the fire brigade and local authorities to get into ground for this kind of thing, to have a safety check in them. There was a Bundon Park tragedy, I think it was 1947 at Bolton, where fans had died. That was the biggest incident until 1971 at Ibrox, and the lessons still really hadn't been learned. So it's not just Ibrox, it's not just Rangers. A lot of people these days would, of course, if it happened now, that would be a catalyst for more pressing concerns and obviously legal ramifications. But it just wasn't the thing. It's not about clubs are spending the money; they just didn't exist. All the incidents occurred at Celtic Rangers games. The problem is the managing the volume of the crowd.
Yeah,
and that's an issue that goes on into British grounds for now 20 years after this. Unfortunately, it doesn't end with Ibrox. The problem is always, managing that volume of crowd. And as I spoke about earlier about the sign at Upton Park, it's very much about self-policing in these days. It's about, take care of yourself from the way out. And that sign just goes again to highlight what how the reaction was and how the society accepted it. It's your responsibility to get yourself out of that ground. You speak about so many people, and you speak to so many people who were told they could go to the game if they left early or if they stayed, for 5-10 minute time to let that crowd disperse. That was just how it was done. The things that exist nowadays and allow you to flow out a game safely, any kind of big sporting event or otherwise, with relative ease, just weren't in place. We didn't have crowd management, and unfortunately, the greater football world, especially in this country, didn't take the lessons on board either.
Yeah, and Willie Waddle, after the disaster, just he sort of made it his life's work to kind of make Ibrox as safe as possible, didn't he? Like, I mean, I've read the story, but I'm going to Dortmund's West Evelyn Stadion for inspiration to try and make it as safe as possible, and that he did make it his life's work, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And that ground is a testament and tribute to all the people that died and all the tragedies and Willie Waddle, because you look at his vision, and going back, I remember, taking my papa to, we were younger, we'd go to Same Beals at their Gale House. He was amazed at how the ground looked. It was just stunning.
Yeah.
And you only have to look at, when the Taylor report comes in after the Hillwood disaster, Willie Waddle's vision was so far advanced in the future.
Yeah.
The alterations to Ibrox were so small. I mean, it really was by that time just taking out where the old enclosure was at the standing area there and replacing it with seats. There wasn't a great deal. When you look at the work that the other clubs throughout the country had to do and had to embark upon and the money it cost them, we were years ahead of that. 10 years after the disaster, we've got a completely rebuilt Ibrox. It becomes Ibrox Stadium, of course, and it just looks nothing like Ibrox Park looked, and that was a definitely model. He went about, he wanted to make it the best. He went to German engineering to build the stands behind the goals because I think they're called goalpost structure or something like that. He was very impressed with it, and they held in the noise. So he spent his life, the rest of his life from that point, and he made a promise. He knew that Rangers couldn't afford another disaster either, and he knew that they people couldn't have, gave their lives an ultimate sacrifice for nothing. So that was his life's work, going out and making it the place it is today.
Yeah, as you say, we see Ibrox even 10 years after it as like the mid-80s, and it was just it's such a massive difference, and he completely changed they completely changed the shape of the whole stadium, as you say. Like it was, I mean, they showed you that last night as well. We completely it looked so far out. Like I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the stadium went, like the stand went out as far as Edmiston House. Like now it's so far in, it's a walkway now. Like he was so far ahead of the curve just to completely change the stadium. And how much like does Willie Waddle? I kind of think as well, Willie Waddle doesn't get appreciated enough just how much he was ahead of his time and just getting that in place and just making sure it didn't happen again.
It's visionary. I mean, to have that foresight and then to know where you want to go and speak to the people you want to speak to, will it be Dortmund's Westfalen? I think they took in, maybe mentioned Gladbach, some other clubs as well in Germany. He clearly knew what he wanted to achieve, and to make the changes, he had to not embrace it, but he was the man that had to sell it to the board, because Rangers, the club, suffered on the pitch for years because the money was getting put in the stands, and rightly so.
Yeah.
But as a fan base, that was the sacrifice that we had to make at that time in order to get this done. And you see the shape of the grounds, and you look at even the reconstruction of grounds, even these days. Take Hampden, for instance. Hampden's shape has pretty much remained the same. Think of places like Parkhead and that as well. They remain pretty much that oval shape. But he decided, obviously Ibrox had the old running track for the Ibrox races that used to go. And if you see any of the old games back in the 70s, I'm sure you've seen the cars that were parked in the sideline and all that kind of thing. He completely eradicated that and basically grabbed us where we had to be. And as I say, it was so far advanced. In the 80s, we had the best stadium in Britain. In the 90s, we had the best stadium in Britain. There was nothing in this country that could touch us. And just to have that full foresight and to push it and to take ownership of it and to put it really at the front of fans' minds why it was so important, and what a wonderful job he did as well. A really remarkable job by a remarkable man.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. It's just that this time of the year we do think of this, and obviously this year's the 50th anniversary. How important is it that we remember this every year, every anniversary, just to get reminders that these people went to a game of football and never ever returned, and that should never ever happen.
It gets even more important, I think, with every passing year, because
you're
now losing that generation that was there, that generation, the likes of us that have had people that will, push on the importance of that factor and the events that took place that day. Their generation slowly down out. So it's up to us now, and it's up to the club to continue this. I think we didn't do the best job initially of honouring it. If you think of the original plaque that just stood, it wasn't the greatest. It was only in 2001 that they decided obviously put the 2001 the George Grange statue opened. But I always thought, even when I was younger, I'd never think why it was just that wee solitary plaque. I thought we could have done more, probably should have done more at the time, because it was such a large number of people that went and made their ultimate sacrifice just going to a football game. So it's hugely important. I mean, you think back to the 40s.
I was just going to touch on that.
That was a very, very emotional day.
That was, it was.
Billy McNeil and John Gregg leading the teams out. It felt fitting. And I think that the fixture itself, for everything else that goes on, the two clubs honour it very, very well. Whatever the differences are, and whatever the differences are in a lot of different areas, it's one that's always been very much respected and very much respected by the other side as well on a whole. So that's good to see. And we have to keep it the foresight. It can't be something that gets forgotten about. And I don't think it will. I don't think it'll ever in this part of the world be forgotten about. But yeah, it has to remain in the forefront. Come this date, it has to be forefront in every Rangers fan's mind.
Definitely. We're just going to kind of wrap up now. I just want to thank you very much for joining me, Stephen. It was really good to get your perspective on it as well. It was fitting that we, like, obviously I had an idea I wanted to touch on it and pay tribute to the 66 victims of the disaster. So thanks very much for joining me on it. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Stephen. Cheers.